Welcome to Swords and Hammers. Truth comes clothed in tales, and the soul remembers what the mind alone forgets. The world is loud, but for the next few minutes, it can wait. Take a moment. Settle yourself. Listen well. Come, let us begin. The question that silences pretenders. A tale of borrowed thunder. The thing about professional demon removal, Festus had learned, was that it was 90% confidence and 10% knowing when to run. His father, the esteemed chief priest Sceva, had taught him this. His father had also taught him the family trade, which involved a great deal of impressive robes, sonorous chanting, and invoices. The invoices were, if Festus was being honest, the most reliable part. There were 7 brothers in the family business, which meant 7 shares of the profits and 7 opinions about everything. They operated out of the great city of Ephesus, where various temples and shrines littered the landscape. The temple of Artemis loomed over them all, a world wonder that was a type of city unto itself. All in all, this meant a robust market for spiritual services. People would pay good silver to have their demons cast out. They would pay even better silver to have their neighbors' demons left exactly where they were, thank you very much. Perhaps even encouraged a little. It was a living. Then the stranger arrived, and the living got complicated. He came without fanfare, without letters of introduction, without the proper credentials that the Guild of Spiritual Practitioners would have demanded. He was a small man, this stranger, with the look of someone who had been beaten by professionals and come back for seconds. He did not wear impressive robes. He did not chant sonorously. He simply spoke a name, and things happened. The kind of things that made the brothers sit up and take notice. The kind of things that made their invoices look rather shabby by comparison. "It's the name," said Quintus, who fancied himself the intellectual of the family. "He's using a new name." "Names are just words," said Festus. "Words are just sounds." "Sounds that work," Quintus replied, and there was no arguing with that. They had watched the stranger heal a woman who had been deaf for 18 years. They had watched him speak to a man whose eyes held something old and cruel, and watched that something flee like a rat from a burning barn. They had watched, and they had taken notes. The name was Jesus. The stranger claimed to speak on behalf of this Jesus, who was apparently someone important, though the brothers had never heard of him. It did not matter. What mattered was that the name worked. And if it worked for the stranger, it would work for them. The test case presented itself in the form of a man named Draven, who lived in the old quarter where the streets were too narrow for carts and the shadows never quite lifted. The spirit in Draven was famous. It had driven out 3 previous exorcists. One of them had taken up goat farming afterward and refused to discuss the experience. Another had left the city entirely and was rumored to be living in a cave, talking to rocks. "Perfect," said Quintus. "High-profile case." "Good for the reputation," agreed Festus. "Assuming we survive," muttered their youngest brother, Septimus, who was generally ignored. The 7 brothers arrived at Draven's dwelling in full ceremonial attire. They had brought candles, incense, 3 different kinds of holy water, and a contract for services rendered. Festus had also brought a small knife, just in case. You did not survive in this business without being practical. Draven sat in the corner of the room, perfectly still. His eyes were open, but whatever looked out of them was not looking at the furniture. The brothers arranged themselves in a semicircle, which they had practiced. It looked very professional. Quintus stepped forward. He raised his hand in the gesture their father had taught them, the one that was supposed to convey authority. He drew a breath. "In the name of Jesus," he declared, "whom the stranger preaches in the marketplace, I command you to depart." The silence that followed was the kind of silence that has weight. It pressed against their ears. It made the candle flames stand perfectly still. And then Draven smiled. It was not a human smile. It was the smile of something that found the situation genuinely amusing in the way a cat finds a mouse amusing. The voice that came out of Draven was like two stones grinding together in the dark. "Jesus," the voice said, "I know." The word it used was old, older than the city, older than the temple on the hill. It meant the kind of knowing that comes from confrontation, from defeat, from the memory of light that burns. "And the stranger who carries him," the voice continued, "I know him too. His prayers have cost me. His words have wounded me. But you—" The thing in Draven leaned forward, and suddenly the room felt very small. "You little men in your little robes, with your little ceremonies and your little contracts. Who are you?" It was, Festus realized with horrible clarity, a genuine question. The thing actually did not know who they were. They had made no impression on the darkness whatsoever. All their years of professional demon removal, all their impressive robes and sonorous chanting, all their invoices and their reputation and their father's teachings, none of it had registered. They were invisible to the enemy they claimed to fight. They were nobody. They had spent their lives building a reputation in a war where the enemy had never once noticed they existed. The violence that followed was not battle. It was correction. Draven rose with strength that should not have fit in a human frame. The brothers' carefully practiced semicircle dissolved into chaos. Festus saw Quintus thrown across the room like a child's doll. He saw robes torn, candles scattered, holy water spilled uselessly on the floor. He felt himself lifted, struck, his carefully maintained dignity ripped away, along with his carefully maintained clothing. They fled into the street, all 7 of them, bloodied and bare. The neighbors saw. The neighbors always see. By nightfall, the whole city would know that the sons of Sceva had been beaten naked by the man they had come to save. The story spread through Ephesus like wildfire, and in its wake came something unexpected. Fear. Not the fear of demons, which the people had learned to live with. A different fear. The fear of those who suddenly realize they have been playing games at the edge of a cliff. The name of Jesus, they whispered, was not a tool. It was not a word of power to be borrowed and wielded by whoever knew the syllables. It was a door, and on the other side of that door stood someone who knew the difference between servants and thieves. The casual invocation of holy names, they realized, was not clever enterprise. It was trespassing in territory, where trespassers were not gently escorted out. And then came the burning. It started with a merchant named Cassia, who brought her collection of protective charms to the square and threw them on a pile. "I kept them," she said, "just in case. Just in case the new way didn't work. Just in case I needed something to fall back on. But there is no falling back. There is only forward, or there is nothing." Others followed. Scrolls of incantation, tablets of binding, amulets passed down through generations. The pile grew until it was taller than a man. Someone did the arithmetic. 50,000 silver pieces, burning. a fortune in security, going up in smoke. Festus watched from the edge of the crowd, still bearing the bruises of his education. He had spent his life learning techniques. He had memorized formulas. He had perfected the performance of power without ever possessing the substance. He had been, he now understood, a very well-dressed fraud. He pushed through the crowd until he stood before the flames. From his satchel, he pulled the scroll his father had given him on the day he joined the family business. The words of binding, the names of power, the techniques that had made the sons of Sceva famous. He held it over the fire. "I knew the words," he said, and his voice cracked. "I knew all the words. But I did not know the one whose name I borrowed. I was a merchant of shadows, and I did not even know I was standing in the dark." The scroll caught, the flame climbed, and Festus discovered that the opposite of professional expertise was not amateur incompetence. It was surrender. What spread through Ephesus afterward was not a better technique. It was not an improved formula. It was something far more dangerous to the kingdom of darkness, transformed lives, people who had burned their backup plans, people who had nowhere to retreat, people who had answered the question, "Who are you?" Not with credentials, but with confession. The darkness had asked its question, and the answer had come back, "We are nobody. But we belong to somebody, and that is enough." Festus still bore the scars. He walked with a limp that would never fully heal, but when he spoke now, something listened. Not because he had mastered a technique, but because he had been mastered by a person. The difference, he had learned, was everything. The professionals had been exposed, the amateurs had inherited the kingdom, and somewhere in the shadows, the things that fed on pretense found themselves, for the first time, in a very long while, genuinely afraid, which is always the case when the name of Jesus Christ is proclaimed. Selah.